Heyo, Weibo here, your least favorite degenerate. Today, I'm going to be going on a huge tangent about Futaba's Palace from Persona 5 and why I think it's the best in the game. And yes, I am referring to vanilla Persona 5 and not Royal, since Maruki's Palace is also a masterpiece on its own right. More on that in another video, maybe. Don't expect it, but also kind of expect it, I don't know, let's just get on in the video. Anyway, before we can talk about the palace, we need to know about the build-up to said palace. So, with that in mind, we find the Phantom Thieves in a huge bind since they've been targeted by this group called Medjed so far in the game, in which this group has threatened to annihilate the economy if they don't out themselves as the Phantom Thieves, which would most certainly lead to their arrest. So, just when the group is finding themselves in a pretty dire situation, Futaba contacts them anonymously asking them to change the heart of somebody called Futaba Sakura and offers to take care of Medjed if they do said change of heart for her. So she's basically asking them to change her own heart. And when the gang finds out about this, that her alibi, Alibaba, haha funny, was actually her, they start to get a little concerned, like, oh, why would you want that? Maybe she was abused and wants to avoid that. And while they are correct, however, the abuse part is wrong. And later on in the story, we find out as a player that the reason Futaba contacted the Phantom Thieves to change her own heart is because of the immense guilt and trauma that she's put on herself for blaming herself for her mother's suicide. So, to summarize for this part, we're introduced to this character in a terrible state where she's full of self-hatred, and that reflects absolutely beautifully in the design of her palace as well. So without further ado, let's get on to the main point of this video. When we're initially dropped in Futaba's palace, all the gang can see is a large, expansive desert with a pyramid in the distance. This is already a fantastic representation of Futaba's condition, as the pyramid is isolated from everything else as she is in the real world. And her palace being a pyramid, or a quote-unquote tomb, is a perfect representation since she is so full of guilt that she believes she has to die, which is something that is stated repeatedly throughout the palace. Her shadow self is the pharaoh of this tomb, awaiting her death. But what's really tragic about this is that her shadow tries to help the Phantom Thieves, only to have herself almost kill them on several occasions because of her tendency to push people away. And this duality relationship with her shadow perfectly reflects her own inner struggle in the real world, where part of herself seeks help desperately while the other is trying to push people away and keep other people from entering her own world. This, however, is not nearly the end to the significance of her palace. We haven't even gotten to the good parts yet. Speaking of the good parts, let's get into them right now. So, throughout the palace, you have to enter different chambers and unlock the next section of the palace, or chamber, until you reach the end. So, there are 4 chambers in her palace. The Chamber of Sarcophagi, Rejection, Guilt, and finally, Sanctuary. Where the Chamber of Sarcophagi just adds on to the pretense that Futaba feels trapped in this quote-unquote tomb. The Chamber of Rejection is about how she feels about supposedly being rejected by her own mother, with her constantly telling herself that she was an awful daughter and person after her mother's supposed suicide note was read in front of her, being only a list of complaints about her. This is shown clear as day at the end of the chamber, where you have to rearrange an image to unlock the next area, with the image being a portrayal of the men in suits reading the suicide note to Futaba. Next is the Chamber of Guilt, which is pretty obvious, but it's a statement on how she feels deeply responsible for her own mother's death, and even believing a fabricated story about how she drove her mother insane, which led her to destroying her research and killing herself. The image at the end of this chamber is incredibly powerful, with it literally being the moment her mother quote-unquote committed suicide. Then, finally, we have the last chamber, the Chamber of Sanctuary, which at first may seem odd, but upon closer inspection, it hurts how much it makes sense. What I believe is, this quote-unquote sanctuary is the idea of her taking her own life, as it's clearly shown to us as a player that Futaba as a character is extremely depressed at this point and is no stranger to suicidal thoughts. Upon this realization, I believe this symbolism is the most chilling of them all. Once you're done with all the chambers, you're met with a roadblock, being a massive door resembling the one of the real Futaba's bedroom door. In order for the Phantom Thieves to continue, they have to have Futaba open her door in real life to change her cognition of the door being unopenable. I believe this action of her opening the door is a representation of the beginning of recovery from her prison of self-hate, which is quite literally to let people into her quote-unquote room being her life. And then, once you return to the palace after opening the door, you meet the final boss, which, unlike all other palaces in the game, it's not actually the palace's ruler. Instead, you're met with the version of Futaba's mother born from her cognition, which is one that says things like, "I hate you and I wish you were never born." This displays the immense weight that is placed on Futaba to create an entirely different version of her own mother that hates her just to perpetuate and add reason to her own self-hatred. Another great detail is that it's impossible to kill the boss until Futaba awakens to her persona and helps out in the fight. And speaking of which, Futaba's persona awakening, let's talk about it. In my opinion, Futaba's persona awakening was beautiful. In which by this I mean when she confronts her shadow in her own palace, where she's brought to remember how her mother really was. That her mother actually loved her, and that the quote-unquote suicide note that was nothing but a list of complaints about her was actually a fake created by evil people who sought to cover up the truth. That Futaba's mother didn't kill herself, it's that she was actually murdered for her research. Man, this is fucking fantastic and you can't tell me otherwise. The injustice dealt to both Futaba and her mother is immense, and it makes me just pissed thinking about it. It's a perfect reflection of the game's themes, which are about standing up to evil and injustice via rebellion. And then, once she awakens to her persona, she assists in killing this cognitive lie that she was convinced of for all this time, and in doing so, chooses to remember her real mother, the one that loved her daughter immensely. Now, doesn't hearing all this make you at least a little upset? Maybe even angry? Or hell, pissed the fuck off? If it is, good. That's the message this game is screaming at the top of its lungs. If not, it's probably me just being a shitty commentator. But you know, that's just how it is for now. I'll get better soon. But that's besides the point. The feeling is what I believe Atlas was trying to evoke from the player, and at least for me, it was the strongest in this palace. First, being the utter sadness of witnessing a broken child, and then the pure rage of when you find out all of this was no accident, that the toying of a child's mental state with the murder of her mother had a perpetrator, and worse, that they've gotten away with it. I say this with all seriousness that at that time I was beyond pissed, and that was the point. Maybe I just have a soft spot for people suffering mentally, and if you don't, you're kind of a piece of shit. But anyway, nothing else in this game has provoked such a powerful feeling. This mastery of thematics is what I call this palace nothing short of genius in design, and why I believe that it's the best in the game. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you could tell, this is my first time doing a scripted video, so kind of want to know how it worked out. Just leave a comment. Other than that, thanks for watching, and see you next time. Peace.